This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe a human capital expert. He's an author, a speaker, and a super coach to Fortune 500 CEOs, celebrities, and influencers. I actually call him the CEO Whisperer. Even more awesome, he's been awarded the title of Global Man of the Year for 2019 and is listed among the 100 most influential people in all of Europe. One of the most interesting people you'll ever meet, Arif. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Well, hello, RF, and welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron Leadership Podcast. I am so excited to have you here today, and I'll be honest with you, I have been waiting to talk to you. Everybody has just heard the intro on you and your bio, and I'm just excited to ask 1,000 questions because you are one of the most interesting men in the world.
And so, thank you, Jim. I'm grateful for your kind words, and I hope our conversation would tantamount to that, what you just actually predicted. That remains interesting.
Absolutely. I think everybody will really enjoy this conversation. We're not going to only get into the meat and potatoes of why people come into this podcast anyways, about leadership and coaching and making each other better. But I just think, with all your experiences that you've had around the world and the people that you've been involved with and have met, there's just going to be some interesting storytelling coming. And I think that's the best thing about this podcast. It is all about the story.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. So RF, before we get into some really meaningful conversations, I've got to ask you about the Global Man of the Year Award. How did you go about being recognized last year as the Global Man of the Year?
Well, that could have been any man's or any male's dream, actually, but that happened to me. That happened particularly when you're surrounded by some of the high achiever females from more than 15, 16 countries. Right. There is a global magazine that's published from London. This has two versions. One is Global Man, and another one is Global Women. So this magazine is very popular in Europe. It's actually published from London. It has a digital version as well as a printed version, and it has a huge following among established female leaders. So while its female version is much more popular, however, they introduced this Global Man some 3 years back. And they started having awards to mainly acknowledge the high achievers in various fields, in philanthropy, in leadership, in business and in entrepreneurship, in several categories. And I found out, to my surprise, somewhere in February last year, that I was nominated for this award. And prior to that, I hadn't heard of it. So I looked with certainly surprise and to my amazement at the list, in fact, and I actually found out that the list was pretty competitive because there were at least 11 global names in it, like front runners in the UK speakers industry, like Andy Harrington and many others. And I looked at it and said, okay, fine. This is going to be 11. No, 17. Yes. That's a year now. So I thought, okay, let's see what happens. So I said, all right, fine. I'm surprised and I'm happy. So fine. Let's see how it works out. And then there comes this day in July 2019 when I was actually about to deliver my keynote speech in another event that's being held at Central London, and probably I was with the Home Secretary Sajid Javid that time, the British Home Secretary. He was actually our chief guest, and I had those 7 missed calls from a number, and I didn't know, and I just rang back and I said, "Oh my God, Arif, is it you? Because you're expected to receive your Global Man of the Year award right here, right now, in the next 35 minutes."
Oh my goodness.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened to me, and fine. That's another story how I made to it. Like it just makes a James Bond story. But I managed to get on the stage. I was the last person to arrive over there, and yes, I got the award. It was such a humbling moment. In fact, there are hundreds of high achievers from more than 40 countries, and it was such a humbling moment receiving that.
I can only imagine. And have you found it to be a good platform? I mean, obviously, it caught my eye when I saw it also. And I know that you've also been listed as one of the most, 100 most influential people throughout all of Europe. But, RF, did you use this? Could you tell us a little bit about, like, once you get this honor and it was this crazy journey and you had all of these 17 fellow finalists that were world renowned, have you found it to be a platform?
Indeed, I actually after the award, I received many inquiries, many businesses actually looking into my profile, many chief executives, uh, uh, like looking for some appointments, lots of meeting requests. That award actually built up
Mm,
into momentum for the next good 4 to 6 months. Um, there was a steady flow of business inquiries. As you are aware, that I'm that's what I actually call myself. I'm a
yeah.
CEO whisperer. So
Yeah.
that's I work with the chief executives. Are actually I break in chief executives to help them get the best out of their lives.
Yeah.
So that particular angle, it caught eyes from several businesses, and yes, it did produce results. So it was not only the award on its own, but it did bring business recognition and a lot of followership.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And again, congratulations. I mean, those are definitely once in a lifetime type achievements. I'm glad it's given you a platform to reach more people, and it's just really cool. It's really cool. So I think all of us in the tribe here are excited to hear more stories from you for sure. You said before, your main type of business that you do, and I know that you're involved in many things, but you are a human capital expert. You are a coach, CEO whisperer, and I'd love to know. At the time of this recording, to let everybody know, we're kind of at the height of the coronavirus outbreak that's happening globally right now. So, RF, what would be something like? I'd be curious. What are some of the things that leaders should be thinking about today in terms of human capital? What would be some of these things that you would whisper into a CEO's ear right now when you have this global pandemic that is on a scale that probably most of these leaders have never been involved in the past?
Well, Jim, that's such a great question because it connects us to one of the biggest challenge of this century, actually, in the last 20 years. I was doing my research in the last couple of weeks because um, several companies, in particularly those I have been dealing with, they approached. Some of them are quite big. Some of them are SMEs. The bigger companies were really baffled in terms of
Hmm.
the response, and I could see that probably while we had 9/11 some 20 years, 19 years back, and it had its impact, but I can clearly see that coronavirus impact it has left 9/11 far behind in terms of its the way it's impacting everything, and it's the way it's
Globally,
impacting
I agree.
exactly the global industries. So look at
Mm-hmm.
the biggest industries that have been impacted, from tourism to traveling to pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
It's actually one of the biggest crises. And when I was looking at it, I found out almost for the last 300 years, every 100 years, from 1720 to 1820 to 1920, somehow the humanity was exposed to such kind of huge crisis, some kind of pandemic, and mostly in the similar region. Somehow, interestingly, say from that particular year, 15 to 25, like sometime it was say 1918, 1920, or 2020. So and now the impact is mind blowing, because it seems to what it has done, in fact, from the standpoint of human capital. It has actually refocused our attention towards the human capital again. While we all thought we have gone ahead of our dependence on the human capital, say in the last 20, 30 years, suddenly we are finding ourselves back again at a place where the human capital is our only hope. Say all the gadgets and all the AI and everything else that has been there, and it has its own advantages. But look at that now, when you are looking around in, say, around the supermarkets or around your city or globally, it seems now the humans are the only hope under the circumstances, who are in the laboratories, who are trying to work out some vaccination, some kind of remedy. And once again, we're back to the, I want to say scare one, but once again, we're back to um, where the point where we can exactly feel that yes, the human capital stays relevant and most important. Now, different companies, unfortunately, in the past years, they, I won't say the processes and systems, they it's bad to focus on them, but somehow they have prioritized them instead of the human capital. I feel, as a student of the human capital and the way it works, that this particular crisis, when it is over, it might it might bring us back. Um, Now even the big companies could restart looking into focusing on the human capital again,
Mm. So,
nurturing it, building it, sustaining it,
yeah.
just mechanizing it.
So it's an interesting comment that you say that, like, let's hope there's a refocus into this. I couldn't agree more. I've been reflecting myself in the last few weeks, and where I came, RF, I came up in the military community, and I was in special forces, and one of the things that I reflected on is my ability to have high resilience in a high stress scenario. The higher the
Mm,
stress,
mm,
the more
mm.
calm I become. And that's all because of my education, my training, and most importantly, my experiences in the past. And
Correct, Jim.
what
The courage under
concerns,
fire.
Mhm.
Yes,
Correct.
the courage.
Right. And
Yeah, the courage under fire. Yeah, yeah.
whether it's literally
Mm,
or in air quotes, and you could say
yeah.
that
Mm,
fire
mm,
is this
mm,
pandemic, right?
mm, mm.
So what concerns me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is when we talk about human capital, when we talk about these leaders, these corporate executives that are there now, most have not concentrated on resilience, say, and certainly probably not the line supervisor, the frontline managers, those type of things. What are your thoughts on resilience, and how does that play into this? And when you say, I hope when this is all over, maybe we focus a little bit more on the human, what are your thoughts on what are those main focus points? But I first would be interested in what do you think about resiliency?
Uh, that's a brilliant question, and I couldn't agree more. In the last couple of not years but decades, I would say that yes, this has happened. Somehow we all have, if not all, then most of us turn into kind of candy floss, uh, so to speak. We are so used to we're so used to the routine stuff, getting things done and having like things our way, that the moment anything goes off the track, we panic. And actually, it's not that we only panic, we absolutely go haywire. And if you, what I'm saying right now, what you are saying, if you just look at the current statistics around the world, you would see actually people having a rampage at the supermarkets, and like the shortage of the toilet roll, just that speaks for itself. Like, this has become a rare commodity. Our sanitizers, and it's all the panic button. Like, the typical human panic button, which actually goes whenever the alarm is set off, particularly when it comes to the crisis of survival. Now,
Yeah.
uh, typically the generation I find, I was born into late 70s, but the generation that saw the World War I, the World War II, and those people who actually have been in trenches, definitely for the good of humanity, for the sake of values, for things which were important. Um, they are the ones actually who, in 1950s and 60s and 70s, they laid the foundation of um, the post-war world, and they have been through these testing times, and they were much
Yes.
more resilient. And then in 90s and then in 2000, we started getting those leaders all over the world who were more driven by by the stage and theatrics, in fact, theatrics, compared to the real life. And then we are also observing a decline in leadership all over the world, and some of the front ranked countries of the world in the last 10 years. Now, I said the leadership, I mean the classic leadership. So it may be the way I define leadership, but yes, that's what. So, yes, so resilience has dropped, and somehow we all or most of us, we have gotten used to the privileges of the modern life, and unfortunately mentally we are not that much tough compared to what the humans were, say, 3 to 5 decades earlier. And due to this reason, our breakdown, due to this fragility, in fact, we have frequent breakdowns, and these things definitely hurt. Like, people who are resilient, they have an ability to adapt to all kinds of situations that life throws at them. In fact, right now, this is where the current normal curve will be really tipsy. Like, unfortunately, hardly 20 to 30% of people would be on that curve where they can handle whatever comes to them, and 60 to 70% they would panic. And a 60 to 70% panic, that's a huge ratio, and then
You
sets
bet.
the trigger, and that sets the trigger in almost any given economy, any given situation. That would be a disaster, and unfortunately that's what we are looking at.
So, as I'm sure most of the audience here is very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I think globally, as things are getting shut down, as literally as you've said, look at the grocery stores and things like that. Everybody is starting to become at the very bottom foundations of that hierarchy of needs, right? The psychological needs, whether it's air, water, food, shelter,
Oh
those
yeah,
kind of things.
correct.
People are kind of in there, and then the next step up is safety, right? Personal
Oh yes,
security,
true, true.
resources.
Yeah.
I think everybody is, they went from high esteem, let's say, near the top of the pyramid, all the way down. So, and you say like 60 or 70% of the people, are tipped the other way. RF, what do you whisper into a CEO? From two things, I guess I'm interested in is like, do you take care of that CEO first? Let's just say the leader first so that he or she could take care of people below them? Or do you try to affect it on a larger scale and say the organization needs to take a step back and think about these things and all that? Where do you think the most effective first whisper from you goes?
Pertinent question. When I look at it, I was actually going to, and in the process of writing an article for an international newspaper. And when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this particular problem. Um, it's more of a medical science challenge, and I think it's actually a character challenge compared to a medical science challenge, right? When I say
Interesting.
a
Let me make sure I
yeah,
heard that again. You
yes,
think this is
yeah,
more of a character challenge than a medical
yes,
challenge? Okay.
correct.
Yeah, I
It's more
love
of a
that.
character challenge for what reason? While we this is I will try to address or include the information which is already scientifically tested and verified. Now we understand that the coronavirus could say the fatality ratio is a max 2 to 3%, right? It is about those people who have contracted this particular illness, this particular virus, and these are the segment of society who have actually who are vulnerable due to their old age. So we're looking at people who are in their late 70s, 80s, and 90s, and at the same time these are the people otherwise they might have some health situations like cancer or some other particular illness which has impacted their immune system. Now, given that this is this is something which is scientifically tested and proven, so that okay, this is based upon the last whatever 150,000 cases, the way they have been treated, and the recovery rate and everything. Now, given that the 97% would survive, right? And given that there is enough food in the world, given that there is enough food for everyone, and probably we can share it, we can coexist, and we can survive that. Somehow, our caveman, defense mechanism or survival fear that was kicked in. So while I was actually in a superstore, and I witnessed something amazing. Like I reached an aisle, and the hand sanitizers are a rare commodity these days. So someone I
Yes.
found out that there's a lady who's with with daughter probably, and and she found that there were 7 hand sanitizers hidden behind something someone put there, and she goes and she picks one, and I hear her daughter saying, "Oh, right, why shouldn't we pick all of them?" And she says, "No, because someone else might need them, and it's important that the people around you they are safe because otherwise you are at a constant threat." Now that is actually the hard truth. This is all about it. So if coronavirus, for example, if people manage to stockpile for say for 1 or 2 months, and they lock themselves down and they don't go out and they manage to survive, the moment they go out of their homes and then once again they start meeting people, and there are people who actually haven't been quarantined, and those people who haven't self-isolated are those people who didn't have that much stockpile, or probably didn't have access to those, say, the hand sanitizers or the gels or whatever, then once
Mm-hmm.
again they are at risk. So in we are in a cycle where all of us are going to survive this together, or otherwise there's no you know isolation and survival. That's important. Some people are thinking that they might uh, those people particularly who are more privileged, those people who can stockpile, and everyone can't stockpile. There are people,
That's
and
a great point.
as you know, that who are actually shopping every single day because to put the bread on their table.
Yep.
right?
Great
What
point.
happens to them? Because they can't stockpile for another 30 days due to various restrictions and limitations. Now, uh, this is a question where I was actually looking at various theories and trying to find out what is actually going on, because somehow after the great wars and after all the thousands of years of human development and progress, and we are thinking, okay, fine, we this is the superhuman race, in fact, and we have gone beyond the basic limitations, and suddenly we look into the mirror and we find out, oh, we are the same people. We are the people actually who would just do anything to actually to survive, and this is, I think, this is causing this particular virus situation has caused some huge questions for psychology, for philosophy to answer. Um, going back to where what you asked, those people who are running companies, they can do two things. They could actually look at, and I've met a couple of chief executives, and we have discussed that. This is actually the time when the big companies and those who are the chief executives, if they have if they have character, this is their time to step this up and actually
Yep.
take the first leap, and actually uh, live that character. Go all out to their team members and their directors, their team members on the lower scale, on the SMT level, and share the situation and share that this company is going to uh, stay with them whatever it takes. That means
So
offering them sick pays, offering them whatever facilitation is possible based upon their personal circumstances, and committing that they are not alone.
so
Otherwise,
RF,
what is happening? Yeah,
and I'll just stop you there for a second
sure.
to ask this question, and it's centered around character. And you gave a great example of the female in the store that only took one of the hand sanitizers instead of the
Yeah.
seven, and told her daughter the story, and that shows true character. When you have these CEOs and you talk about it's time for them to show their character, and you started to give some examples before I interrupted you on that, but I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to hit this point on it is when you talk about character, could you give me some insights if we're just talking or coaching about character itself? Because when I define character in my head, I think of a leader that has high integrity, great communication skills, the ability to have EQ and IQ. That EQ portion is to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, believe in me because I believe in you. Can you help
Mhm.
us figure out a little bit more about character? Like, because I think it's critical as you start to give some of these examples and you say like a leader needs character. I'd love to know personally, how do you define character?
Uh, well, Jim, something that actually hasn't changed much in the last couple of thousand years. When we're looking at a leadership defining theory, that is probably the one that relates to character, right? Say when Alexander the Great probably was leading his soldiers some 3,000 years back, or others probably 5,000 years back. That was relevant then, and that is relevant now. So I think we both are talking about the classical theory, and that definitely integrates, yes, courage and confidence, and also along with this there comes accountability and ownership. In
Ah,
fact, that yes,
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
I am responsible. So it's not pointing fingers towards others and say, "Oh, fine, not me." And then, yes, it involves collaboration. Yeah, it's actually working together at the same time, and humility is a part of it. Humility and modesty, they are part of it. Uh, I would definitely mention justice and fairness, because if you take them out, then this whole thing becomes meaningless.
That's so true.
Along with this, I would say prudence and temperance, where you exercise your action with definitely self control and restraint, but at the same time you do take action. It's not that you do nothing. So farsightedness with integrity. Now, integrity and authenticity, as we understand, they would remain relevant whatever it takes. Whenever you're looking at any kind of leadership, they both they actually remain relevant. And then
Totally agree.
compassion. This one word actually, I can't stress less, stress more, in fact, when it comes to compassion, because somehow, once again, as a student of the relevant discipline, I've been observing this somehow in the last 1 or 2 decades. We have an erosion of compassion in our leaders, and it's not only the political leadership, but it is actually the corporate leadership, and that's why I would try to qualify this statement. That's why when I heard, say, Apple probably allocating $150 million, or and another like probably Google sparing 120, I would say, oh yes, it sounds good, but I think I would prefer probably $5 to $10 billion instead of $150 million, right? It's
Right.
actually the size of the organization, size of the machine, and this is something global. We are looking at kind of a crisis where we need to we need just not to pose in front of cameras and feel good about it, but actually this is much deeper than that. So compassion, that definitely comes along with balanced perspective, and I think spiritual awareness, and I think all of them, they make character.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're right. You just can't say character and move on with it. And everybody's going to have their own different definition. But one of the things that you kind of, in a circular motion did was go around the horn on covering like these most important human centric character
Oh yeah.
traits that are important for a leader. And it's kind of funny. I was reflecting on it, your comments about, Alexander the Great, and even beyond that, about how leadership actually hasn't changed much. The art and science of leadership itself hasn't really changed much in history. Where most people fail is they just don't execute on simple principles. They just don't do it. Leadership is an act. It's a thing of doing, and the examples that you've given are example. And the reason we talk about Alexander the Great 3,000 years later is because he did it. He did those things to inspire his people and all of that. And it's the other point that I reflected on. I was thinking of all the leaders in my life as you ticked off these different character traits.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that amazed me is from a follower point of view, when I was a follower, always am, always will be, but as following some of these leaders, they could get educated all day long. You could get educated in these things, right? But if it's
Oh
not
yes.
authentic, if you
Correct.
know they're just not feeling it, then they will never truly be able to lead because it's not authentic. It's
Absolutely.
I think it was an
Absolutely.
excellent point that you made.
You're right. Authenticity still remains, I think, one of the fundamental quality on which the trust and all other relevant perspectives are built up. So while we know that integrity and respect and empathy and responsibility and humility and emotional mastery, they all are important, but I think the underpinning is authenticity, and I
Absolutely.
think yeah, that's what we probably lack most in our world in 2020, unfortunately.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can remember back in my military days when I was assigned to another organization, And this leader, in air quotes, had all the qualifications, had all the experiences, but he was just a jerk. He was just a jerk. And you could tell it, the things that he did weren't authentic. And guess what? I just didn't want to perform at 100% for that kind of a person, because you just felt he didn't care either. And it's certainly something I believe that's obvious when you have a leader that's underdeveloped or doesn't have these true character traits.
Jim, you actually used this particular word, jerk, and somehow, somehow in the last 10 years, there is a rise of jerk leaders.
I agree. Yes.
All over the world, in fact. And
all over the world.
This is,
yeah.
Yes, this is something which is very a very interesting phenomena, because I even actually some uh, 10, 12 years back, I read a book, and surprisingly, that book actually somehow targeted Steve Jobs as a jerk leader. Though now it's a different after 10, 12 years, we can look at him differently. But leaving him aside, in the political sphere and other spheres all over the world, somehow um, those people who are playing to the camera, playing to the gallery, and who are less authentic, somehow they are they seem to be rising. And I think that's one of the problem that the world has got to tackle. And I think this Corona crisis would expose many jerk leaders in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when the world is seeking the exact opposite, right? When
Exactly. Yeah,
they're
sure thing.
seeking that, back to Maslow, they want someone to, in theory, put their arms around them, comfort them, lead them through these crises. And it's just interesting. And RF, I want to dig a little deeper into this. Like, do you believe that we just checked out on human-centric leading, 20 years ago? Because the leaders that are in position now were learning this 15, 20 years ago, learning their trade craft 15 to 20 years ago, and now they're leading, in quotes. And so do you believe that we just gave up on it years ago about truly understanding the most important thing is that human side of leading? How'd we get
I
here?
think yes, we probably, yeah, that's a big question. That mm, the situation where we have landed is a is a pickle, in fact. And it reminds me of this ancient Greek story. You know, this um, you might have heard of um, uh, Icarus, the one he's actually the son of the master craftsman, right? He's the creator of the labyrinth, in fact. So Icarus and his father, they they actually attempt to escape the country by means of wings, in fact. So the
Yes.
father uh, constructed those wings from feathers and wax, right? So Icarus' father warns him that his complacency, and then telling him that he should never fly too high or never fly too low, right? And he
Yes.
should never get close to the sun, because otherwise the wax in his wings will melt, right?
Correct.
And and somehow in the story, in fact, what happens, unfortunately, Icarus couldn't exactly stick to his father's advice, and he
Yeah.
he flew very close to the sun, because he was too pumped up and too full of himself, or too full of shite. So and the waxen wings finally melted, um, and unfortunately, Icarus met his tragic end. So what happens is that those leaders who are not real, and those who are created through a process of social media hype and social engineering and media and tabloids, and because they could spend more, and because they could own organizations, or they could own somehow opinion making strategists and other say a whole lot of other resources. So what happens whenever they fly close to the sun, and here the sun actually resembles the real threat, the real challenge, the real big
Mm-hmm.
question. Then unfortunately their waxen wings, they melt and they suddenly land on the ground, in fact. um, um, and the world finds out what they are made of. So
You
uh,
know,
the, yep.
no, I was going to say, what's interesting about that is I think because I was reflecting on, it's the sun that did it, that flew too close to the sun, but it was the
Mhm,
sun, the
mhm.
father son dynamic. And I was thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
youth, like I'll be the first to say I'll show some vulnerability. I believe I was very much like Icarus in my early years, right? In the early years of growing up
Mhm,
as a
mhm.
young leader, or your first few years in your 20s in the workforce, you kind of have that bravado and that
Oh yes, correct.
invincibility and like I
True.
can do it, and a lot of not listening to your elders or to your leaders and things like that. And it's an interesting dynamic that most people grow out of the Icarus scenario. But what you're talking about is these leaders that are senior leaders in organizations, and they still act like a youth and have that Icarus mentality of they're bigger and better than anybody else, and that anything can, nothing can happen to them. And it's such a dangerous environment.
Correct. And these are the people with their hands on the say nukes. These are the people with their hands on trillions of dollars, and that is somehow um, the age, in fact, where yes. Your previous question was that what do we do about it? Should we just
Yeah.
stay put and let it happen, or should we raise our voice and do something about it?
Right.
So I think yes, we do something about it, and the best thing that we can do anything about it is that we live the real leadership model. We walk the talk. While those people with amplifiers, they could always make more noise, but then at the same time, the authentic, the real, the genuine would prevail in the longer run, though it might be a bit noisy outside. However, whenever the real challenge strikes, I think the authentic leader would always come out as a winner. And I don't mean winner as someone who always wins, but the one who who gives his best, the one who is actually in the thick of it with his full character. He's not playing to the gallery or cameras or for a tweet or for an Instagram story, but there's no greenwashing in it. It is actually something to the core one believes, and one could lay down his life or his health actually doing what he or she is doing.
Yeah, John Maxwell has a famous saying that leaders always find a way to win, and I think you just defined what win really means,
Oh yes,
and
correct.
that's so important. Absolutely. So, one of the other things, RF, is I know you're an author. You're a multi-book author, and the latest one that you have just written has all the importance of the apostrophe and where it is. And I chuckled when reading this book because it's so just the smallest mark. And I'm sure this was your genius behind it. So for those of us who don't know what I'm referring to, RF is the author of the book I'm Possible, but of course it's written impossible. It's the same word, but if you put that parenthesis mark right there, or it all of a sudden changes the entire meaning of it all. I am possible instead of impossible. And you talk about we face a crisis of vision, and we things need to be done, but most people don't know how to do it. And so I'd love to know a little bit, when you wrote I am possible, not impossible, talk about those possibilities and what do we do? What do you see as that blueprint that you refer to is and talking in the world of possibilities. Because I'll tell you, we've been talking for 40 minutes now, RF, and it seems like doom and gloom. Like these leaders just can't get it right. So,
Correct.
So what do you
Yes.
think are some of these things?
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So when you look when we talk about the doom and gloom, and when we start actually believing that it is all doom and gloom and there is no tomorrow, then unfortunately everything breaks down, like from our immunity system to everything. And it's important to believe in tomorrow. It's important. It's crucial to believe in a day when this would end, and something better would happen, or this would not stay forever. For example, coronavirus would go in, say 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. Yes, it's not gonna stick in there forever.
Right.
And this is true, in fact, because nothing sticks on forever, whether good or bad. So it's important that we believe in possibilities, and um, believing in possibilities, that's a mindset. And I think you have, and most of our listeners would have heard of, the kind of mindsets, the two kind of mindsets we have. Uh, the one is fixed mindset, one is growth mindset.
Growth. You
So
bet.
there's one kind of mindset that looks at problems, that looks at limitations, that looks at what cannot be achieved, what cannot be done, because these are the reasons which actually make it impossible. And then there is a
Yeah.
mindset then there's a mindset that looks into possibilities, that um, looks into some solutions, or looks into that could be resolved, that could be conquered. And that is the mindset which is I am possible. Now, the interesting thing about impossible and I am possible is that they spell out the same, right? So
That's
say,
right.
okay, fine. It's IMPOSSIBLE. So what does it make? It makes impossible, or it makes I am possible. Now that actually that's the trick, in fact. And yes, you're right. This is where the apostrophe did that trick. So it was actually Muhammad Ali, the great American boxer. Um, I was inspired what he said about impossible, and I think that was when I was a college student, and I came
Mm.
across this quotation of his, and it said, "Impossible is just a word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they have been given than to
Wow.
explore the power they have to change it. So impossible is not a fact, it is an opinion. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary, and impossible is nothing." Now, this is so profound, it's so powerful, and this actually helps shape up so many things um, in my life. Because interestingly, I came from a very small village from Pakistan. I was born over there in late 70s, and that was actually one of the most God-forsaken place in the world. It is at least a um, couple of hundred years away from civilization, like in terms of
Wow.
the basic necessities, the schools, the health facilities, everything.
Right.
Like you can imagine, I was almost 11 years when I first time I was able to look an automobile and say, "Oh, fine, what the hell is that?" Right?
That's crazy. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of place, and
Yeah.
that's where I was born in. That's where I started my journey of life. And I that was a small valley. It is called Stone Valley, and it is a historical place. The historians believe this is probably the place where the human beings, they started walking
Oh,
straight.
wow.
Yeah, a couple of million
Okay.
years back. Yeah, it has its place in archaeology. So That was a valley, and I used to look at the mountains all around me, and I used to think, is there any world outside or beyond these mountains? And
Right.
I didn't know that. So I think I was 13 years old when I actually stepped out of those mountains, and I was shocked that there was a huge world outside. So,
Yeah.
so you look at that kid's mindset, in fact, and then there was no turning back, and I somehow I didn't have any hopes to go to the college or university or have any education, but somehow it happened, and there's some crazy uh, some crazy thoughts, and I would share with you that when I was in my university days, I actually um, uh, that was the time when I was actually a kid who was in the university, who was doing odd kind of jobs to just make sure that one could continue. And
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down seven of my best wishes. These are the seven things I would like to achieve before, say, I am 35. And they were all crazy wishes. For example, having a dinner with Miss World, to having a dinner with Bill Clinton, President Clinton, and there are
Uh-huh.
other five as well. And somehow, interestingly, all of these wishes, they were realized, and one of them was to actually speak at the Oxford Union, at the invitation of the Oxford University. Um, and all of them were realized before I was 35. So this is uh, this is actually a story. This is a story. This is my personal story. Um, this is only happening because I believed in possibilities. Because had I been looking at the limitations, coming from a small village with no language skills, with no education, with no financial resources, actually, it was impossible for me to even, yeah, even as I said, uh, imagine a world beyond those mountains. But then this was the possibility mindset that opened
Right.
all the world, and the opportunities. So that's why I think that uh, impossible to I am possible. That is one good mindset turning point that suddenly opens the whole world of possibilities and opportunities, and this is crucial
So,
for
RF,
human psychology. Yeah.
yeah, where did it come from? Where curious about you, like that 11 to 13-year-old young boy that was surrounded by mountains and didn't know there was a world beyond the mountain range. Where did that come from? Was that from your parents? Was it religious? Was it just something inside of you? Where did that drive come from to say, I'm going to walk beyond that mountain range and see what's out there?
That's a profound question. Actually, it's a multitude of. Um, my father was a veteran soldier. He actually, yeah, he fought in the World War II, from the British side, and um, somehow the place I was born in is actually, um, it's a it's mountain area, craggy, and um, it's it's um, it's a hard place. It's actually extremely cold in winters, and not much not much compassionate. So it had its challenges. So my father was a true survivor. He was a fighter, and I would say that I looked up to him, and I definitely, there are certain elements of what have inherited, and at the same time that inspired me as well. Along with this, yes, some religious part of it, which was actually, yes, that one gets what one strives for, one gets what one actually strives for. You get, there's one of the phrase actually in Quran that stuck to my mind, that the human being actually gets what one strives for. So it's not that you are
Love that.
predetermined, or you're just locked in. You get what one you when you go all out. And actually, while not knowing that, what is my limitation? It suddenly made me like kind of limitless. That fine,
Right.
if it's all, then I can actually try and actually get. This is something that filled me with hope. That yes, I can probably get anything. And though later in my life I found out, oh, fine, probably it's not anything or everything that you can get, but yes, probably a lot of that. Say 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, whatever crazy dreams were there, they were realized, and they had that happen. And once again, that actually made me a writer and a speaker. That if that can happen with me, and if this is my story, uh, then other lucky people who were born into much better places, much better surroundings, they could do even better than me. And
And it
uh,
And it
yeah.
still comes down, though, it still comes down that you did it, right? You weren't just dreaming it, you did it, right? You went from a dreamer to a doer. You actually started that journey. You actually wrote these books. You actually put yourself in position to be at a dinner with Bill Clinton or partying with Katy Perry on Instagram that I saw the other day with you. Those kind of things. But you, from dreamer to doer, correct? Is that the significant thing? Like, uh, the human can do anything that they strive towards, like you said in the Quran, but you have to start that journey with one step forward. Would you agree with that?
Jim,
Or
actually, you just nailed it. It's actually, I'm one of those. I've actually spoken to more than 500,000 people in the last, say, 10, 12 years, and approximately 60, 65 nationalities from various top stages of the world, from, say, London to various European countries, in various parts of the world. And what I found out that, and I will repeat that again, that talent is talent is the most overrated thing in the world, right?
mm, yes,
Talent is absolutely overrated. It's what I've seen personally, and I've seen people over the last 2 to 3 decades. So, based upon my personal experience, I would say I have seen people who were averages, doing things consistently, taking massive action, and at the same time creating fortunes and changing their lives, not only their lives but probably impacting lives of millions of people around themselves by taking action and doing things consistently. So one of the most important thing I would love to reiterate, that is that talent or genius is they are overrated in my humble opinion. It's the consistent, continuous, and massive action. That's bigger than anything else. So yes, while the possibility mindset is brilliant to have, but it means nothing until no action is taken. So
right.
perseverance, in my view, that's the most uh, important trait, right? Uh, it's actually beating your head against a wall, right? It's more likely to produce a concussion in the head than a hole in the wall, right? So this is
Right.
where, yeah. So it's important that we have a vision, we have a plan, and then we persevere to that. We stay consistent with it, and then we get there. But only with an imagination, without taking any action, that would amount to nothing, unfortunately.
I want to rewind this conversation for probably the last 2 minutes. And this is why, because you have just really struck on something that I will honestly say my mouth just dropped because I had an aha moment with you today. And
Oh,
so I'm a big action person too, right? I'm always like, stop dreaming, start doing, leadership is an action, it's a verb, all those things. But you have to have some of these other things, like you just said. You got to have that vision. You've got to have the willpower. You've got to have the perseverance, because you could be doing things, but doing them for the wrong reasons or doing the wrong things. Like you said, by banging your head against the wall. Okay, that's action. You're banging your head against a wall, but it's not going to get you anywhere. So it's not only from going from dreaming to doing, but it's doing it with certain visions and the right path and all of those kind of things. That's a huge aha moment for me right now, because I usually just walk around, RF, and say, stop dreaming, start doing. It's and that's not necessarily right either, without
Yes,
those
Jim,
other traits
because
that you just said.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Because we would go wrong, and sometime we would have a concussion, right? And we would have,
Yeah.
we would fall down. And it's important that we recalibrate. It's important that we pick up and we don't repeat the same mistake twice. It's important that we, while staying consistent and while persevering at the same time, it's important that we don't lose sight of the ground realities, and accordingly recalibrating ourselves to do better this time. Are actually failing failing forward.
Yes.
Failing, uh, if we
Yes.
fail twice, it should not be the same thing. And if we fail thrice, it should be something different, like not failing for the same reason again and again.
Exactly right, and I love it. Failing forward, I use that a lot as my little bumper sticker sometimes too. But
Yes,
without
yeah,
the
so
without the context of understanding what failing forward means, it's just a bumper sticker. And
oh yeah, correct.
I think this conversation is going to help so many people. I will tell you this. It's funny. I wrote this down in my notepad because I think one thing I'm going to take away from us talking today is just the love of this phrase of impossible is not a fact. It's just an opinion. And by
Yes, correct.
using that as your springboard to this entire conversation, it just changes how you see the world. At least it does for me. And someone that's hypersensitive to the world of leadership and trying to, iron sharpens iron. It's the two of us, right? Having this conversation, making each other better, and others listening. And here we go again, because it's just one of those things like it continues to reinforce the fact that it's these simple phrases that can then kickstart off some of your thought processes to other things and make that actionable thing of leading or follow, or even being a great follower, right? That's the big thing too. A follower, someone that's listening to us now that's not even in a leadership position, everybody has to realize they are leaders no matter where they sit in an organization. But that trait of impossibility, right? Impossible is not a fact; it's an opinion. If a leader gives you a task and you're like, I just can't do it, catch yourself saying that every once in a while and go, I can do it, or at least I'm going to try, and fail forward if
Absolutely.
you have to. Yeah.
Absolutely, you summed up in a wonderful manner that yes, we have a mindset. It could look at the dark side. It could look at the positive side, the brighter side. Or it could look at both sides. In fact, that's even better. But then, in fact, having a belief that yeah, we all could find great moments. We all could be winning, and then yes, we could all get stuck. We all could be losing. But then it's important knowing that yes, this would end. As you just said, there's yes, coronavirus. Somehow it seems that's the end of the world. No, the world would survive it. It's the only 2% to 3%, unfortunately, who might not survive it, and we would all miss them. In fact, and we would if we would lose them, our hearts would bleed for them. But then somehow, interestingly, the 2 to 3% are lost every year on the hands of flu for the last
Right.
probably 100 years, right? Somehow that doesn't make that kind of front news, and that causes that kind of scare. It doesn't mean that we should ignore it. No, it means that we need to fight it together. It means that we need to share what we have, and we need to look around ourselves, because in somehow we are the cats whose tails are tied together. Like we cannot actually we cannot we cannot survive alone. If in an environment where everyone is clean out of coronavirus, and those who are underprivileged, unfortunately, if they are not, somehow the threat to the system still remains. So it's important that the whole world gets protected. It's important that we open ourselves. We open our while we say, yeah, you might have heard of this recent. Uh, uh, I would say the Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister,
Hmm.
is is
Yeah.
is his happy birthday. campaign, like washing hands and singing actually "Happy Birthday" for
Sing it.
20
Yep.
seconds.
Because there's your
Yeah.
20 seconds.
So
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah. So washing hands, but at the same time opening hearts. That's equally important.
Yeah.
It's not only the washing hands, but opening hearts, which is even more important because we stay aware of our surrounding and we stay open and with full of compassion to those who might need us, whether they're elderly or whether they're less privileged.
Yeah. You write in your book, change ourselves so that we can change the world. And I love that saying. And again, just even with the Boris Johnson campaign, Happy Birthday campaign, those simple things, changing ourselves, the way that we do things, will change the world. And there's a practical application of that. And then even from a leadership perspective, too.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
no amount of leadership theory or pedagogy or research would add up anything to it if it's not making this world a better place,
Yeah.
and adding empathy and compassion to this world, because we all are together in it.
You bet. Absolutely. The world, I think you'll agree with me, the world is getting smaller and smaller every day. And it is about, I know it's a bit of a cliche catchphrase, but being a good global citizen actually is relevant today. And it always has been. But being a good global citizen and a leader, they need those traits today for sure.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
uh, for those who are concerned about the coronavirus, I would actually, uh, I would say that this is important that this particular time we temper fear with reason, and panic with patience, and probably uncertainty with education, right? Because this is an opportunity for us to learn a great deal about health hygiene and limiting the spread of innumerable transmissible disorders in our society, right? And this is possible that we can actually do this uh, by teaching and learning from each other.
So, from a leader's perspective, go back and you put your coaching hat on. How do you suggest to a leader to do those things from an actionable point of view? Do you talk to them about the art of communication, and is there an art of communicating as a leader to others? And what would be some of your recommendations when it comes to communications?
Well, when I define myself as a CEO whisperer, um, so what happens that there are people who would ask me actually, all right, what's that? Why
Yeah.
would you call yourself a CEO whisperer? Um, so it's actually it's an, being a CEO is a very interesting, and it's also a very lonely place, right? Um, that most of the people might find it surprising, but somehow, based upon let me quickly, I guess probably, yeah, I've trained and interacted with more than 5,000 CEOs from more than 120 industries, right?
Wow.
They were from pharmacy to sales to FMCG to production to various industries. Not all, but then there are certain points where most of the CEOs, they actually they have a normal curve where those traits are aligned. For example, most of them are not having fun anymore, right?
Ah,
And
true.
uh,
Yes.
and here we're talking about a typical CEO who is an established one, who could be a jet setter, who could be taking a couple of £1 million or dollars in terms of remuneration, um, in 60s and 70s. Well, they are in 50s as well, but say I say a normal curve. So they stop having fun and they start feeling lonely, and it starts getting to them. Now that's a very interesting discovery. Then there are also they're also somehow obsessed that they are the only ones in their particular environments where they can do things better than anyone else, right?
Mm.
And
Right.
this particular mindset actually helps them get the most on their platter. They fill it to the hilt, and this actually adds further stress. And this stress actually, what I do with CEOs, in fact, when I say I'm a CEO whisperer, is actually um, breaking their existing pattern of habits and getting things done, habits, routines, and their structures of getting things done. Somehow they're really attached to those habits, because remember, like, being successful, that could be an end product of some great habits, right? And this is true to every one of us. Like, we have a particular way of getting things done, and while those habits which last longer because they help us getting things done, and the more they help us, it's kind of self-reinforcing, right? Because the more they work, we believe, oh yeah, that is actually the only way, that's the best way to get them done. So yes, the CEOs are somehow very rigid in their behaviors, and that's where I help them break down their existing patterns, and that's where I help them, um, say, acquire new habits, and get over some existing bottleneck there where they might be sticking in. Um, at the same time, some of the CEOs, actually not some, but many of the CEOs, they're also they're also facing this, life and relationship quandary, the challenge of the time and managing the life balance, along with existing challenges, the work-life balance, which is very toxic, and it also weighs heavy on the shoulders. So what I help them, in fact, it is getting assessing their current situation, looking at their existing and their previous patterns of managing it, and acquiring new patterns by definitely breaking the ones which are not working.
Do you find it difficult? A couple questions. Do you find it difficult for them to admit these vulnerabilities? Do they not see it themselves? And then two, is it critical that the person that you're coaching release themselves? Like, they've got to allow you in so that they can have an open and honest conversation of what potentially they are doing wrong, because they may not, because it's a habit for life. You may probably don't even
Oh
realize
yeah,
it
yeah,
sometimes.
correct, correct. Yes, Jim, you asked me something very interesting, because that's a hard hitting thing. That is actually just like playing squash. Actually, it's very different compared to a typical, you know, CBT thing, like cognitive based techniques, in which people, they get an aha moment, and they just relax on the couch and say, oh yes, that's with the CEOs, it is kind of combative. It is very upfront, and it is hard hitting. They are tough people. They are people who actually might be supervising or leading 1,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 people, with probably 100, 200, 300 leaders working under them. So they're so full of themselves. They don't have enough time. They don't have and they want to cut cut the crap, right?
Right.
They don't want to zoom around and roam around things. So it is straight to the point. It's actually
Yeah.
challenging them, catching them at the most vulnerable point and confronting them. Right. So here, this is what you did. So why did you do that? What do you think? And why this would not work? So it is usually a heart exchange, and it's a direct exchange, because that's what it is important with the CEO, particularly if you're coaching, if you are giving them that kind of leverage where they could have their way, they would have their way. So it's important, because they
Yeah.
are the chief executives. But if you
Right.
want to make any difference, depending upon, definitely, a CEO whisperer wouldn't have all the answers, all the solutions. The resources are within us, right? The resources are within our framework somehow. We need to discover them, right? They are not obvious. So what happens that while, yes, so I challenge them, and there a lot of hard hitting goes around it. And while we are through that process, I have curated a model around it. Through that model, in fact, which is yes, where we challenge each other, where we listen to each other, where we understand. But this whole thing happens much quicker compared to a normal client or a normal manager or a normal leader.
I
And
see.
then
Right.
and then we figure it out, what needs to be done. And the moment, actually, the CEO, the good thing is, once that change occurs, the results come pretty quick, and then
Right.
it,
Yeah.
it, it qualifies for itself.
Defenses are down. You
Yeah,
bet.
correct.
And RF, do you believe that who needs a coach? Let me ask you that, I guess. Who needs a coach?
Well, James, is I would actually, um, I would um, bounce this question to you. Say, hi, Jim. You tell me who doesn't need a coach, right?
Okay. Yes.
Right.
All right.
So,
Yeah.
so this is how it works. In fact, so I haven't met anyone in the world yet who wouldn't need a coach, and I keep on telling this story. I've worked with like you must have heard of Tony Robbins, and our listeners, and Tony Robbins
Of
is
course.
one of the
Yes.
global names. Um, he was a great inspiration, and we actually shared stage together. We also spoke together at many places. I remember this November 2012 evening, right? I hosted President Bill Clinton in London, and that was
Hmm.
like visual in a friend. There was we had a company, and uh, President Clinton is sitting. He was actually a keynote speaker, and at that particular event, Tony Robbins also joined us, and
Okay.
something happened, and I've quoted this many places, and I wouldn't actually resist myself not mentioning it here again. President Clinton, while with more than 500, even Elon Musk was there. Like that time,
Oh,
actually, he was
wow.
not that well known. So November 2012, and President Clinton, he he starts delivering his keynote speech, and he's talking about the economy and the entrepreneurship, and definitely whatever is relevant to the conference. That was a Black Pearl event, and it was a huge success. More than 6,000 chief executives attended, and in that gala dinner, there were only 500 top CEOs there. And while he's talking all about what is relevant, he suddenly stops and said, "Oh no! Before I say anything else, I would actually love to acknowledge one person who is sitting over here. And I, as a person, I, as the president, former president of the United States, or as a leader, or as an entity, I must not be in this shape as I am right now had this person not been there. And I
Hmm.
would actually stop whatever I'm doing, and I would love to acknowledge that person. And this person is you, Tony Robbins." And he
Oh,
says that,
wow.
and I think we all stand up and we all give him a standing ovation. Why did I quote that? Because yes, even if you are the president of the United States and you are the most powerful person in this world, and we understand that in the last whatever 50, 70 years, Bill Clinton has been one of the most successful one. While in terms of presidency, in terms of the financial, the economic outcomes, and all that. So he's considered among the great leaders, and he needed Tony Robbins to live through the dark times, to survive whatever happened during the scandal, after the scandal, and or whatever life throws at you, right? So even if you are a Superman, you still need a coach. So that's why I said, Jim, who wouldn't need a coach?
I love it because it's true. It's a fantastic reminder. You can be the most powerful, literally the most powerful person in the world and still need a coach and still need a
Absolutely.
coach. So who doesn't need a coach? I love that. I love that. And it is so true. It is so true. And I think, as our listeners hear this storytelling from you and these great examples, I think we're all reflecting within ourselves, like, thank goodness these type of podcasts exist, because this does make us better. This iron sharpens iron, but it also is a reminder that we all do need coaches. We need to have that person that holds us accountable, that shows our habits that we don't even realize we're doing, all of those kind of things. And it's critically important, and probably now more than ever, as you've talked about before, as we start to look internal and have these human-centric discussions again. Like, that is the most important thing. You got to start talking to each other on a human level, for sure.
Absolutely. And I love this iron sharpens iron. This whole thing is so visual in nature, because when I was a young kid, I've seen in my village, actually, when the carpenter is working, and then this is happening. All the fireworks, when the iron touches the iron, and
Yes.
the fireworks caused by it, it used
And
to be
it's a
such.
reminder.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It is. In fact, yeah, it's
It's a
such.
reminder that it's not easy, that it's hard, that it takes friction to create something. And it takes two things forcing itself onto each other, right? As the whisperer, and all of the exposing someone to have a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset, that impossible's not a fact, those
Yeah,
kind of
that
things.
is
That's,
an opinion.
it's that, yeah, it's that forging against two hard things, that ironing sharpened iron, and that visual is absolutely, RF. And those are the things that you did for us today. Those are, like, this is just, you're just an amazing person. We open it up as, you're one of the most interesting people in the world. And it's true. And it's
Thanks so
because,
much, Jim.
yeah,
I hope I qualified it while we finish it. There's one thing, the way I sum it up, is the phrase, which is somehow from Katy Perry to several global celebrities, have been actually, on my request, they have been actually saying it. That is, saying their name and actually saying that I am possible. But this is a complete thing. It says, I am possible, and the time is now. That's important that I finish this entire statement, because, yes, knowing that you are possible, knowing that there is tomorrow, knowing that um, you can grow, and knowing that this whatever darkness or gloom would end, and something is happening. But then the time is now. So I am possible is one thing, which is, yes, that I am possible, I can. And then the second phrase is, the time is now, because that is where the action part comes, Jim, that we have already actually summed up. Yes, it's all about, once you are possible, then this is the time to take action, and the time is now. So I am possible, and the time is now. If there's one thing I would like to stick with our listeners, it's probably that phrase, that you are possible, and the time is now.
I love it. And there's no better way for us to end this podcast but with that statement. And RF, it has been an absolute privilege to spend this time with you. I know we are all fired up. The tribe is fired up about learning these things. And I will tell you that I'm Jim Hotailing. I am possible, and the time is now.
Now. We did it, Jim.
Now. All right. Thanks again. We really appreciate it.
I'm so grateful, Jim, and looking forward to catching up again with Iron Sharpen Iron's tribe, and all those amazing people who are making this world a better place. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. We really enjoyed talking to RF about embracing the phrase, that impossible is not a fact, but only an opinion. As you finish listening to this episode, I challenge each of you to accept RF's call to action and state along with me, I am possible, and the time is now. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways and suggested action plans. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build our tribe. Until next time, remember, iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every day.